going to open it up to Pete Grannis.
Obviously, very, very smart people up here, and I think everybody in this world, and certainly the universe of thinking citizens of the world, understand that we have a crisis and we need to deal with it. The focus on fossil fuel extractors is interesting. They obviously have a carbon footprint. But if you really are concerned about the global impact of carbon emissions, you've got to look at all of us. Collectively, we have driven, over the last decades, massive uses of carbon fuel, and we will continue to do so. 90 or 95% of all the carbon fuels burned to power our cars, generate energy for our buildings, some turn on the lights. We are dependent on fossil fuel, and it's a demand-driven economy. So while we focus on the fossil fuel extractors, I think Elizabeth pointed out more than anything else, is that we need to focus on our collective dependence on fossil fuels. And just, it's an interesting dynamic. Obviously, we are very, very invested in our future as far as looking after the interests of the million people that depend on the Common Retirement Fund for their retirement future. Clearly, the obligation of the fund is to make sure that we use, as Vicki said, the best knowledge we've got, the best tactics we've got, and to use the resources and the power that we do have, not the power we wish we have or we would use if we were in a different setting, but the power of the fiduciary of a $180 billion fund. And I just want to ask Stephen one question. And clearly, when you divest, there's no such thing as stranded assets in a divestment. So who is going to be buying the ExxonMobil stock that the Rockefeller brothers are going to be divesting? Because that's the heart of the question. We have a voice. We have a voice that cares because of the controller, because of our investment strategy. We use that voice. It's an important voice. It may not be the definitive voice, but the fact that we can get 38% of a shareholder vote at the ExxonMobil at the last annual meeting on our climate proposal, I think is important. But at least we have a voice. Selling stock to people that don't care, that don't have the voice, that don't want to use the voice, that maybe deniers of the whole underpinnings of climate change, and there's still a few of those around. One of them will be on the ballot in a couple weeks. It's a very important, I think, distinction to make sure that it's understood that those of us that care, that those of us that are engaged, that those of us that share the global issues that we all care about, starting with the big public pension funds. We're not impact investors, we're not social investors. We are investors that use our voice based on the best available economic information we can get and where we think we can have the best impact with the resources that we've got and the limited authority we've got to use our voice going forward. So, Stephen, who's going to buy those shares that you are going to be divesting?
Well, I don't know, of course. Somebody will buy them, and they may not share our view. But when it comes to voice, I would argue that our voice was amplified far more loudly by divesting than the engagement we tried to do for 10 or 15 years. That was a real use of it. It reached around the world. And so that was a decision we made to use our brand name plus our assets to make a really important statement that is still relevant.
And so what impact has that had on climate voting in the atmosphere?
Well, what it's having is building a movement of other institutional investors who are divested. And ultimately, this also sends the signal that you and Elizabeth have talked about, which I think is extremely important, that we all have to think about this as a systemic problem comprehensively. But by building a movement of people who say, one step we can take is to divest, is a way of building awareness that this problem is real, it has economic, social, and environmental consequences that are undeniable, and in fact, the carbon-fueled capitalism that we have enjoyed for 300 years is obsolete and has to come to an end urgently. And I think that's the message collectively that we have to deliver.
You know, Pete, here's the deal. Pete, no, you're asking the wrong question, and it's an unfair question. You're asking an unfair question to a fiduciary who's actually taken a reasonable position. The position for the New York State Common Retirement Fund is quite different than the Rockefeller Fund. And hey, hello, you're getting less money from them. Can you get it? That means, I looked at the fund. It used to be 2.3% of the retirement fund. was in ExxonMobil, 2013. It's now 1.5. That's $900 million less in actual investment money. They used to be producing 10 to 12%. They ain't producing that anymore. They're producing like far less, almost negative returns. You're losing money. You lost money on coal. You're losing money on fossil fuels. Why don't you ask the company about how they're going to turn around their profits? Why don't you ask the company about, you're asking them about climate change. Why don't you ask them about what they're doing to attack Schneiderman and attack the Attorney General in Massachusetts and attack the SEC and using the Congress of the United States to attack climate activists? Why don't you start asking real questions? Stop talking about bullshit. I mean, let's start talking about like what that company is doing, the mismanagement of the fund. If you really see an outlier company, and Exxon has lagged the Standard & Poor's 500 for the last 11 quarters, unprecedented in the 70 years that I've looked at of the company. You ask it any questions about finance? No, you're not. You're not really asking questions.
All right, Tom, I'm
Pete.
going to move it to someone else in a minute. Thank you. Wait, so Pete, did you have a brief comment?
Tom had my job for a number of years. I was wondering if any of those questions were asked when he was there. So.
So, Brad Hoyle, you wanted to
Yes,
raise.
I don't know if there's a